good number of folks, so we're going to go ahead and begin today's conversation. So, hello, alumni and friends. I am Christina Pearson, Assistant Director of Alumni Communities and Volunteer Engagement within the Alumni Relations Department, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to Navigating Senior Leadership. So this webinar showcases UChicago alumni who have risen to leadership roles across diverse industries, and it also marks the launch of our Women's Leadership Initiative series, with more exciting events happening in Chicago and New York throughout Women's History Month. And as we dive in today's conversation, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box if you can, and we'll address as many as we can during the conversation. And then after the webinar, a brief survey will pop up. We would love to hear your feedback, and we will be sending any resources or the recording by the end of this week. So please keep an eye out for that in your inbox. All right, so now I am pleased to introduce Jen Kennedy, our Senior Director of Alumni and Volunteer Experience, who will introduce today's panel moderator.
Thank you so much. As Kashima shared, my name is Jen Kennedy, and I'm Senior Director with the UChicago Alumni Office and a proud college alumna myself. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our moderator for today's really fascinating conversation, Enka Chumba. Enka is a partner and the Chief Marketing Officer at Chief Outsiders. With over 25 years of experience, she has worked across the world on high-impact initiatives through innovative marketing programs, data analytics, holistic go-to-market strategies, and product differentiation. Enka has worked with Fortune 500 companies, including Gap, Microsoft, and American Express globally, and with CEOs and private equity companies across industries. And if that's not enough to keep her completely busy, she also coaches startups and early stage ventures around the world. Enka is also a dedicated member of the university's alumni board and proudly represents the alumni community there. Please welcome Enka Chumba.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on the time zone that you're in. It's an honor and a pleasure to moderate this panel of just amazing, wonderful, highly accomplished women. It's important, I think, certainly from a professional development standpoint, but also just for awareness to hear different perspectives from women excelling in their leadership roles in a variety of different industries and then achieving balance as they can. I just want to sort of give a quick tidbit that you'll hear a variety of amazing perspectives, and that there's no sort of right or wrong. And so it would be great for you to just listen with an open ear and open heart as we have these conversations. So without further ado, I'll just pass it along to the panelists, starting with Laura, then Natasha, and Farzia, if they would introduce themselves, your name, and some great things about you, current role in industry, and why you've decided to participate in this panel.
Hi, thanks to everybody who's attending. I'm Lara Druyan. I'm actually now a venture partner at Silicon Valley Data Capital because I'm another UChicago grad, and I've launched our own fund called Private Liquidity Partners, focused on late-stage secondary investments. I also serve on a couple of boards outside my day job, including the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce's US board, a startup board called Symphony, doing computational and sort of serving computational chemistry, and a profitable marketing services company on the East Coast. And the reason I'm here is I'm a woman who's built her career in the intersection of finance and technology. And as I've done that, I didn't have many female mentors or role models. So I aspire to be what I wished I had had earlier in my career.
Great. Natasha.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday. Hopefully it's sunny and bright where you are. It's a pleasure to be here. My background is also originally in finance. I started out my career in investment banking and have done corporate and business development and strategy along the way. And then I pivoted to presently be at Meta, so a technology/product company. Previously, I was at Visa, and I also spent some time at unicorn startups in the Bay Area. So happy to talk about that. I also serve on the board of a publicly traded ad network gaming company in Canada, and I'm a venture partner with an early stage venture firm in the Bay Area. Similarly to Laura, the reason I'm here is because when I was starting out my career, I was the only woman on the sales and trading floor, which was my first job. And I feel like the persona that men and my male colleagues can bring to work and can be is different, and their experiences are different from, being a minority person, and in the career world, and even like the demands that our family lives put on women. So I'm excited to be here and talk about these experiences.
Great, thank you. And then last but definitely not least, Farzia.
Hello, everyone. Farzia Kaufman. I graduated from the University of Chicago in 2009. Currently, I am a director of corporate strategy and business development at McKesson. So McKesson is a Fortune 10 healthcare services company. We've been around for about 200 years. Most notably, 1/3 of the pharmaceuticals that reach a patient in North America go through McKesson. So that's primarily what we're probably known for. But as a healthcare services company, we touch biopharma, we touch providers, patients, to make sure that we're having patients get the medicine when they need it. So I've been with the company for about 7 years, but one of the reasons that I chose to participate on this panel is outside of my day job, I also serve on the national board for McKesson's Women Empowered Employee Resource Group. It represents about 4,000 members and allies, so female and allies across the company. And we are really the voice for driving change and creating the workplace where we can ensure women are thriving, and having female leaders that you can look up to or understand from their experiences how you can pay it forward. That is really what I've had and what I hope to contribute to in this conversation.
Great, thank you all. So let's dig in. First question. So we've all had pivotal moments that defined our current career path. What was that moment for you, and what steps did you take to follow that path? And I will punt this to Natasha, if you can give us our thoughts, and then Farzia.
Sounds great. Thank you. So I am probably a person on this panel who maybe has done the most pivots in their career. So I'm happy to talk about that. My situation is kind of unique. So I came to the University of Chicago from Latvia. I was an international student. So to stay and grow my career in the United States, I needed work visa sponsorship. And there were limited companies that were willing to do that. So I feel like my initial path was sort of set. It was going to be finance, because finance companies were willing to deal with visa sponsorship, and they had a fleet of immigration attorneys to work on that. And an opportunity for a pivotal moment actually came sometime later when I received my work-based green card, which gave me more flexibility to pick from a variety of career directions in which I could go. And at the same time, I moved from the East Coast to the Bay Area. So on the personal front, I met my future husband at a work conference in New York, and ultimately relocated to San Francisco. And boy, was I in shock when I moved to San Francisco from New York, because everything seemed so different. And the industry was different. So I had, a fair amount of tenure by then in investment banking, and, the career market was different. So that's when I took this brave leap of faith and joined what was back then a $2 billion technology startup in the fintech space. So that gave me a perspective into what that world was like. It was not my favorite experience, but again, had I not done that, I would have always wondered. And later on, actually, it was my husband who pushed me to explore even further away from finance and suggested that I try out the field of people operations, which is not something that I would have thought about in my wildest dreams. But at the time, I also kind of coincidentally got introduced to a woman who came from Google. She went to Harvard Business School, And she was building out a team of leaders who had operational experience, but also had experience on the business side, because she believed that you can be your best HR person only if you understand the true pressures that the business side of the company experiences. And that's how I joined Visa. So it was a combination of being in a position to make that change, right? Previously, I was on a work visa. I simply couldn't. But then being open to the fact that careers are not always this vertical ladder. Sheryl Sandberg in her book writes about the jungle gym. So my career very much was a jungle gym, and I've transferred laterally and then continued to grow in that new role and new industry that I've taken on. So, like I said, I had not a great experience. Like joining a fintech startup was not something that I would do again. But because I had that experience, I have a perspective on it. So I think when you can and are in a position to, it's great to take a calculated risk, right? Yeah, I'll pause here, pass it on to Farzia.
Thank you.
Sure. So early on in my career, my aspiration was to go the pre-med route and become a doctor. And that's how I would make my mark in healthcare. And then I took organic chemistry and I started questioning my life decisions. But no, in reality, if you think about what was happening during that time frame, this was in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009. Electronic medical records were being rolled out, and academic medical centers were at the forefront. Community clinics, they were still trying to figure out the investments needed. I mean, this is fundamentally changing how we practice medicine, how data is captured, how patient outcomes are monitored. And that's really understanding that macro landscape of what was happening in healthcare. That's what triggered my interest into pivoting from being pre-med and going in the physician route to really thinking about the economics, the regulatory and policy space of healthcare, which is very dynamic and very complex. And so that's when I pivoted to really focus on public policy and specialize in healthcare. So I do think that it's, as we think about career pathing, really having that intellectual curiosity and monitoring the landscape that you are looking to grow into, what's happening in that space and where are your intellectual curiosity bringing you, and how does that actually define what paths you continue to pursue?
Great, thank you both. So Laura, describe your first leadership role. What strategies or skills do you believe helped you stand out and secure this opportunity?
Yeah, I had right after business school, I went to Wall Street. I was at Merrill Lynch doing corporate finance and M&A for media, telecom, and tech companies, mostly in the media space. And I like finance. I hated that job, and so not unlike Natasha probably. And I wanted to get into venture capital, and I interviewed something like 23 venture capitalists, and I said, if I wanted to become you, what would I do? And Doug McKenzie, who was then a senior partner at Kleiner, said, go get a job as a product manager. It'll be a hard shift for you, but at Stratacom, Cisco, Sun, or SGI. And as a BA in econ, that's not a natural transition. I typically do not recommend, when I give people career advice, changing industry and function is a very hard thing to do. Do one or the other, but in this case, I was lucky in that Silicon Graphics had a lot of press at the time for its work on Jurassic Park and other things in the entertainment space. And because of my experience in banking, I had a really deep vertical knowledge of an industry that they really cared about. And I think that was really helpful. So when you are making that in this case, I was becoming a product manager. So managing a suite of products and then eventually people. And I think that I got my foot in the door through a business school classmate who recommended me, who just left the company. That doesn't get you a job, but it will get you an interview. And then I think focusing on how, when you're making this kind of transition, for figuring out how you're going to help the company. I mean, you have to reframe how you think about this. You think about them as, the company's doing you a favor, but actually you're doing the company a favor because you're going to fill a role that they need. And I think the other thing that was helpful when I was in the role is that because I'd had 2 years of lots of modeling experience, I brought a very different approach to thinking about products and would do financial models for how we should look at things, whether they break even and how much hardware pull we were going to have, because I was doing software at a hardware company, which is a really hard thing to do because you're always fighting for budget. But nobody had approached the problem that way. And that was really helpful. I call this telling stories with math. I don't think people do that enough, because when you're fighting for resources, and increasingly in our current economy, resources are going to be scarce, thinking about how you make a business case and make it not abstract, but very concrete is a really important skill that I found really helped me in my career attain, especially at SGI, attain resources, budget, people, et cetera. And that was incredibly valuable.
Good, thank you. So when we dig into sponsors, like where were there these specific mentors or sponsors that help guide your path, and how did they impact your career? So Farzia, Natasha, can you give us your perspective on in that area?
Absolutely. So I think both mentors and sponsors have unique roles as you think about how they contribute to your career growth. So for me, mentors are individuals where you are being very selective of who are the mentors that you are selecting and what do they do really well that you aspire to hone as a skill. And so I think being very intentional when you ask someone to be a mentor, be intentional about what you want to provide in that relationship and what you are expecting to learn from that mentor-mentee relationship. And being specific about what is it that mentor does well. It does not have to be someone in your organization. It can be anyone in your community, in your family. I mean, I think this goes from hard skills and soft skills. Mm-hmm. And then the sponsor to me is someone who is willing to go to bat. So when you think about the value that you are bringing in the role that you have on the team that you are with, in the organization that you represent, it is really how do you have visibility and exposure on the impact you are having, and who are those sponsors? These go beyond just the manager that you are reporting to. How are you ensuring that there are folks who, in closed doors, when they are talking about talent, when they are talking about advancement, they are willing to talk about you? And the more people you have talking about you and the value that you bring and the bets that they're willing to take on you, that is really how sometimes doors open and opportunities arise that you may not be aware of or you may not have considered.
Great.
Yeah, I completely agree with Farzi. And I also will say, I think it's a very difficult thing, finding a mentor and finding a sponsor who will go to bat for you. And it also depends on the environment that you're in. So when I was just starting my career in investment banking, I looked around and there were a bunch of white men. And like, was I the person that they were going to sponsor behind closed doors? No, I wasn't going to be that person. And, yes, people can build strong relationships and you try to be likable, but ultimately I left that field because I didn't, I probably didn't have it in me to keep trying as hard. And I wanted to go to a company where people like me were more represented, right? A company that was more diverse and that could understand the balancing that like women have to do oftentimes. So I will say that in my life, where I had strong mentors and sponsors, they also happened to be my bosses. And I completely agree that they don't even have to be people who work at your company, right? They can be in a different field. But it is also useful and convenient when you're working together and they know exactly who you are. And in fact, it is their job to be talking about your performance and to be deciding, are you on that talent bench or are you not? So I will also say that I've had bad bosses. Like, I think that's one side of this that we don't talk about, right? And we all, I don't know, hopefully not everybody has had a bad boss, but a lot of us have, right? And a bad boss is a person who, if something goes wrong, they push it off on their team versus owning up to it, right? And a great sponsor and a mentor is somebody who thinks that we win together and they really dedicate their time and they invest in you. One of my great bosses, she wrote my business school recommendation. And she was so supportive of that pivot in my career that I wanted to take, even though she needed to hire somebody else and train them and replace me, right? And that's additional effort for her. But like these people, they want the best for you. And then I had a woman, interestingly, both of them are women. So there's a woman who brought me to Facebook, which is now called Meta. And she, I do compensation at Meta now. I haven't been doing compensation my entire life. I'm obviously very fluent with numbers because I started my career in investment banking. And also, I joke that compensation is actually the closest field to my undergraduate degree in economics because it's all about the clearing price for talent in the marketplace. And in a way, it's like super clean. But she hired me and she saw in me that passion and the commitment. And she invested a lot of time into training me. And she invested into helping me build a network within the company. She's no longer with the company. We still talk and we're still great friends. And I very often reflect that the reason I'm able to have influence across the company is because of the introductions that she has made for me, which is particularly critical because I started at Meta remotely during COVID. And there was never an opportunity to meet these people sort of for these water cooler conversations that can organically occur otherwise. So, I don't know if I have this ta-da moment here and a prescription as to how to do it right, but just being aware that like not every boss is a great fit and not every person is a great fit to be a mentor, but like letting these relationships grow organically and building on the trust and the friendships, in my experience, has been key.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what we're going to lean into and pivot a little bit in talking about barriers. All right. So what are some of the biggest barriers women face when advancing into leadership? And how have you navigated some of these challenges? Laura, can you help us with that?
Sure. I've been part of the benefit of being, I guess, the class of '89 is I've seen lots of organizations, both really large and small throughout my career. I think that many women think their work will speak for itself. They don't think about promoting their work or achievements with people who matter in the organization, but whether we like it or not, people who tout their achievements, hopefully more subtly, but people who tout their achievements get noticed and they get promoted. This is not a natural skill for me personally. It is one I've had to learn. So, for example, when I was running innovation at Royal Bank of Canada, I worked across the bank and I reported to the bank's chief strategy officer. And as I've told people, this exposed me to the internecine warfare that is executive politics at a very large company. And innovation is one of those things that gets cut very regularly when markets go down. So it's sort of a luxury in a company. So one of the things I did, for example, is I created a newsletter to update people about our work, which was a natural thing to do because we did work across the bank and people were really interested in what we were doing. But it was also a really good defensive mechanism because we could keep people aware of what we had done, what we were working on, and it gave our team visibility. Not every job is conducive to creating a newsletter, so you have to make it work in a natural way for your role. But I think being really aware of making your work known to people, your people will not find out about this on their own. It is not a discovery process. They are not looking to promote you. So you have to be your own best advocate.
Great, thank you. And Natasha, you mentioned a little bit or alluded a little bit to sort of bias or underrepresentation. So how have you navigated those challenges? And what advice would you give to others that are looking to overcome similar types of obstacles?
Yeah, again, I don't know if I have the right answer. I have sort of my answer and what has worked for me. So again, my story, like I mentioned, is a bit different. I was an immigrant, and I guess still am an immigrant, even though I'm a U.S. citizen. So I was different. I was always different. Had an accent, and it is hard in certain industries when all of a sudden you're just you don't quite fit in. And I remember talking to, a person who I guess was my boss, was a mentor in college. He was a professor at the business school at the University of Chicago, and I worked for him as a part-time research assistant. And at that point, various companies were coming to recruit for various jobs. And I remember, I think Goldman was recruiting for wealth management. And I asked him, like, should I apply for that job? And he said, no. Like, how are you going to build a client base? How will people trust you with their money? Like, you're different and you're not from here. I don't know if that was the right answer to give. It was a very candid answer. And honestly, he was probably right? Because wealth management is a relationship business. And if you're like part of the job is just cold calling, right? And asking people to transfer assets to you to manage. And if somebody like me calls you and there are like very few connecting points, like, would I be successful? I don't know because I didn't apply. I didn't go that route. So just things that I was always cognizant and mindful of going through life. And I will say it's interesting, as I've lived here longer, I've been able to build more connection points. Like I don't feel like an outsider day to day, right? Because I'm also, I'm a mother and I'm a daughter, and I can relate and connect to people just based on these things and the common experiences that you go through. But working and career advancement, to Laura's point, it's the people who are able to highlight their achievements and be kind of top of mind, right? And relatability does matter. So I am happy to be at the company that I am at now because it is diverse. It doesn't look like what investment banking looked like 20 years ago. And there's that opportunity to build these connections. At the same time, I have classmates who were able to be like the only woman from Romania who built a great career at Goldman Sachs, and that's amazing, and more power to them. So I think everybody has their path, but definitely I think having some commonalities with the people who are in a position to make decisions that will help you in your career is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I see a little bit in the chat around sort of influence and power, and I feel like when I've done these panels, it comes up. So let's dig in there a little bit. So how do you manage your influence in a leadership position to drive change effectively? So Farzia, can you give us some perspective there?
Sure. So when I think about influence, there's three things that come to mind. One is credibility, empathy, and then organizational culture. So credibility for me is influence doesn't come from the title that you hold in the organization. Influence comes from what's the credibility that you've established for yourself with the wins under your belt or the impact that you've been able to demonstrate in the organization. And so that's kind of the first part. So establishing credibility and not underselling yourself. There's a reason you're in that room. You are expected to have a perspective. Whether it's right or wrong is not the notion. It's about having a perspective, but holding it loosely. If there's new information that arises in those conversations that enables you to pivot, that's important. So coming in with a perspective, but being open-minded to new information. Then the second is empathy. If you are influencing stakeholders, have you done your homework, or do you understand where they are coming from? What is happening if it's a business leader, if it's a P&L owner, if it's a senior leader? What is top of mind for them? In their list of 10 to 15 priorities, what you are trying to influence or drive the decision to, how does this rank in what they are trying to accomplish? If you are trying to operationalize a recommendation, what is necessary for them to do in their organization to actually enable it? So have you done that? Are you empathetic in, yes, you have a recommendation, but do you understand what is top of mind for those that are involved in order to actually bring this idea or recommendation to life? And then the last one, and I think Laura, you and Natasha both alluded to this, it's, relationships. So understanding organizational culture and how decisions are made or advanced is very important. And for example, at McKesson, we are a very relationship-driven organization. And so yes, credibility is one aspect of it, but investing time in building those relationships is foundational to like drive progress, positive advancement for strategic priority. So I would say influence stems from, at least from my perspective, those three.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about leadership styles. And Laura, I'm going to punt this one to you, and then I'll answer a little bit. How would you find your unique leadership style, and how do you keep yourself sharp as you grow in leadership?
Sure. I'm personally a big fan and big believer in Kim Scott's radical candor. Radical candor. She's written a couple books, meaning that I care personally about the people I lead, and I provide direct and constructive feedback. So I don't sugarcoat things, but I also don't. It's also not harsh. And I think keeping that balance is important. In terms of keeping myself sharp, I'm a lifelong learner. If you looked at my husband's always horrified when he looks at my open tabs. I'm always reading. And so I don't stay current on technology trends, which of course is a big part of my job, but about broader business trends and ideas. I think that God knows in generative AI and everything else, things are moving so fast. So if you are not staying on top of things, it will reduce your opportunity set. It will also make you vestigial in organizations really quickly. And so, at least for me, that's really important. It's of course very University of Chicago, but it also happens to be true. So,
Great, thank you. I mean, for myself, I'm often told that my leadership style might appear a bit unorthodox in that, I'm not big into hierarchy. But sometimes you are in organizations that are very hierarchical. And so I think for me, I love people just in general, right? So I love people, I love human beings. I love part of the passion of what I do, especially with mid-size or mid-stage companies that I work with is, I want them to be the best version of themselves, right? So whether that's the company, so people are the collective, or the individual human. And so, for me, it's highly, empathetic, right? And Farzia, you mentioned that a bit earlier, where don't get me wrong, like I can be tough and have difficult conversations, but it comes from a place of nurturing and caring, not necessarily of cracking the whip. And so, what I've learned sometimes, frankly, the hard way is that if you're able to create an environment where people feel like, especially if they're reporting into you, that they can trust you, or I work a lot with CEOs, and feel they need to feel like I have their back and I'm not going to like steer them wrong. So if you work in an environment where that's the case, then you don't have to crack the whip. People will bend over backwards for you, right? Because they trust you and they know that you want them to succeed. So they want to succeed because they want to make you proud. Like that typically is my leadership style. I'm very sort of, I don't know, egalitarian in that may the best idea win. And sometimes the best idea is from the most junior person sitting around. And I think a lot of that comes from a place where I'm often in rooms where, I mean, I'm in my mid 40s, but I don't necessarily look like it. So people think I am the junior person in the room, and I'm often the senior person. So if I had $1 for every time people thought I was the analyst, that would be my grocery money. So there's a bit of that. And the reality too is everyone has unconscious bias, right? And so, I've entered in rooms or spaces where people think, oh, she must be the sassy one for a variety of reasons, or she must be the hard-nosed one for a variety of reasons. Or, the only perspective, let's say a room of people will have of a person in leadership, especially if that person happens to be a woman, is, a stiletto wearing, brief toting, hardlining human. And I think sometimes that can get in the way, and that, as women, I think we can be very empathetic. And so in terms of unique leadership style, again, like I can definitely be tough. Like my bar for the folks who report into me is relatively high, but it comes from a place of caring and knowing that, I'm going to bat for them, and my hope is that they will achieve things beyond their wildest dreams, and that I'm helping them do that. And so, how do I keep myself, sharp? I certainly reading books, all the things that have been said, like I read books, I look at articles, I listen to podcasts. I'm also part of CEO peer groups. And so those are great opportunities to be amongst leaders who aren't necessarily in my bubble. Say, hey, well, how do you think about that? Have you tried that? And I think amongst all those things, right, it helps keep me accountable, helps keep me honest, and it pushes me to continue to grow as a leader and not sort of rest on my laurels. So in moving forward, what strategies have you used to navigate power dynamics in a male-dominated space? And Laura, I'm going to punt it back over to you because I feel like that's been probably a lot of your career.
Uh, it has venture, let's see, investment banking, technology product management at a hardware company. I used to joke that software was the women's ghetto, venture capital, and then back to a large bank. So yes, I think the key is, and Natasha's touched on this too, you build alliances where you can, right? So you find champions. They may not always be in your department. They may not always be at your company. They may not be at your firm, but having people who are willing to stand up for you is important. In venture capital, having people willing to send you deals is important. And, if you are keeping, and it's, you can't be, I mean, to Farzia's point earlier, I mean, business is built on trust. And so you also can't be transactional. I think one mistake, and I see this a lot when people come to me for advice, it's like they're one and done. And that's fine, but it's not really going to get them very far, right? And not that I can take on 20 mentors at a time or mentees at a time. I can't do that. But I think one of the cautions I would say is this is not about being transactional in terms of trying to meet someone, have them stand up for you. You have to build relationships. They have to be genuine. And you're looking for allies and friends, right? I mean, they're not your friend, but they are really your allies. And I think one thing I would also suggest that I personally have not always been good at, but I think was really great feedback I got relatively late in my career, a number of years ago, when I hired a business coach who interviewed a bunch of people who'd worked with me previously. And I wish this guy had told me this years ago. He said, something you haven't been good at, but it's really important, is thinking about how to make your boss look good. And I think that is great advice for people, especially if you're a woman in a male dominated industry. I think that would be, I wish I'd heard that 20 years ago. So if I could share, that would be one piece of advice I would share with everybody, but really thinking about we all need support. If you are the only woman or only X in an organization, you may not have your doppelganger, there to provide that support, and they may not be the ones to support you anyway. But trying to, find those people and build relationships with those people that are meaningful, and they'll be there to support you later. So.
Right. Great. Thank you. So we're going to make another pivot and talk about achieving goals and planning and balance. There's been a number of questions that have popped up on that, and I've been silently saying to myself, just give us a few moments, we'll get there, I promise. So this one is for you, Natasha. How do you set and achieve long-term career goals while balancing daily responsibilities?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll say this, that when we were preparing for this panel and we all got together, we spoke a little bit about this. And like, I so appreciated a chance to talk to the other women on this panel about that, because again, like with everything that we're talking about here, and like everything that is taught at the University of Chicago, there isn't a right or wrong answer. There isn't a clear answer, right? There isn't black and white. It's a lot of shades of gray. It's context dependent. I wish I could pop in a question into an AI chatbot and have them figure out for me how I should approach this, but it changes, right? So, I will share this phrase that really stuck with me. I don't even know who said this first, but people have been repeating this, is you are replaceable at work. You're not replaceable at home, right? And I think about that often. And, there are moments, I think, in all of our lives when we feel like we're at 100% across all fronts. Everybody has a different family situation. Somebody's taking care of aging parents. Somebody has young children who need a lot of attention. Somebody is like on the verge of getting to that promotion at the end of the year and need to push just a little bit harder. And I've definitely felt like I'm maxed out across. And on some days, I feel like I'm trending towards my goals, and some days I feel like I'm failing across, and that's not a great feeling, right? Uh, I think just giving yourself grace and knowing that you're doing your best, giving that moment and the situation that you're in is important. Mental health issues are on the rise. And like, if we're talking about allies, right, and advocates, like, if we're not going to be an advocate for ourselves and an ally who occasionally will give ourselves like a pat on the back and say, you're doing great, like, who else will, right? You kind of have to be the first person to do that. I think that's just key. Again, like, remember that you're great. We all went to an excellent school with lots of demands, so we're used to that. Nothing new here. So just know that you're doing great, right? And it's important to take breaks. It's important to acknowledge that life can be challenging.
Thank you. And what practical advice do you have for women looking to create a roadmap for leadership? So Farzia, I'm going to pass this on to you, and then hopefully, Laura, you can answer afterwards as well.
Sure. So I do think that having a career pathing roadmap is very important. Taking time to really think about what is your career aspiration in 3 to 5 years down the line. And I think, Natasha, you talked about it earlier on where you took some laterals as you pivoted. And, part of this is really thinking about the roles that you are pursuing. What is it that you are looking to gain out of those experiences? And how do those roles and experiences end up translating to what your end goal is in the 3 to 5 year mark? And I would also say this is not a static document that you make once and then you revisit on an annual basis. Part of this is, do you have a board? Companies have board of directors, right? That help steer. Do you have a set of board of directors where you are sharing this roadmap and getting their feedback, getting their input? And part of this may be that in some areas of that roadmap, you're taking a longer time in role. And that could be because you have personal commitments. When we were having a prep call, we were talking a little bit about this, that we are the sandwich generation. I'm a mom of two. I also have elderly parents. And so, when we think about the caregiver situation, there are going to be portions of your career journey where you might be in a role for a bit longer than you had hoped for, but that is because you are prioritizing your family commitments and family time. And so I think being true to yourself and understanding that, yes, there are going to be others in the organizations or out that you aspire to, and you are seeing them go hypo fast or like excelling in their careers. Everyone has different personal commitments and professional aspirations. And so give yourself some grace. There will be times in your career where you are sprinting and you are crushing it. There's going to be times where you need to pause and say, you know what, I'm good in this role. I am going to further hone and drive value right now because I need to prioritize some of my personal and family. So I do think, one, being intentional in creating that roadmap and having a vision of what you aspire to, but then putting it in chunks of, okay, what are the roles that you need to have under your belt? What are you trying to accomplish from those goals? That will get you to that end.
Perfect. Thank you. And Laura?
I agree with everything that you just said. I guess the other advice I would offer is, as early as you possibly can in your career, figure out what you're really good at, as well as what you love to do. Because if you do that, you'll do more of it, you'll work harder, and ultimately you'll achieve more. And that really matters to your road for success. But I think, and I think the earlier you can do that, the better. And seeking out advice from people senior to you, asking people how they got there and how somebody like you might get there. I think one of the things I often get, because people want to get into venture capital and they don't want to hear, you actually need an operating job first, right? They're like, oh, I'm an investment banker. I wanted to get into venture capital. I'm like, you think this is finance? It isn't. It's distant cousin to finance in a lot of ways. And if people are going to take time and give you advice, at least do them the courtesy of pretending to accept it rather than telling me why that's like not what you're going to do. So have some humility when you're seeking out advice from people, because we're busy and we're happy to be helpful. But I think sometimes I've seen that, and where I think about when I went to venture capitalists and said, "What would I need to do?" I mean, that's a genuine question, and you should genuinely want to understand that if you're sincere about getting to a place that isn't obvious from where you are. I think another thing that is useful is sometimes invest in yourself and get a business coach in times where you feel stuck or you want to transition. I have done that a couple of times in my career and found it incredibly valuable. It's definitely paid itself back, and it's worth it. Those, like a lot of knowledge, it's tribal. So getting recommendations from people you trust is important. And I think the other thing that is helpful in terms of thinking about a roadmap for leadership, there's I'll try to get the name of the book. I'll look it up. A book I would again wish I'd read earlier in my career, looking at people through a disc lens. That's a way of looking at people's personalities. And in the book, one of the things they talked about was a lot of people talk about treating other people with the golden rule. How would you like to be treated? That's actually incorrect. You should think about how they need to be treated, because you may have one personality archetype, and the person you are managing, the person who is managing you, may have a different one. So communicating as they need to be communicated with is key, and giving them what they need is key. And it may not be what you need. So like for me, I'm in the terms of this book, an eagle owl. So I am very analytical. I have a leadership style that's pretty domineering, but I also can really stress out people around me. So being aware of what effects you may have on others is also just terribly important as you're trying to ascend.
Thank you. On the same theme of balancing personal and professional goals, and I'll throw this out to all the panelists, what systems or habits have helped you prioritize self-care and avoid burnout?
I'll go. So one of the things that I've done is set boundaries. We talked a little bit about balancing, and balance is a bit of a misnomer. There's going to be times where work gets more priority, or it's just a busy season, busy time. And so I do think that being intentional about where you set your boundaries between personal life and work life, like if you need to make dinner from 5 to 6 to make sure that everything's good to go, you're not scheduling meetings at that time, and being vocal about it and being okay with that. I do think, especially in the climate that we're in today, being flexible in how we work and when we work is important, because at the end of the day, it's the outputs that you're delivering. So if you establish credibility, if you are having strong communication skills and being able to share that and say, okay, you know what, from this time to this time, here's transparently what I need to be focused in on. I do think that helps minimize burnout. And there's going to be ebbs and flows.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I'm a parent of 19-year-old twins. My daughter's a freshman in college. My son's a senior in high school. And I guess the piece of advice that you have to figure out, I think Myra Hart at Harvard Business School says it well. She said, you can have it all, but you're not going to have it all at the same time. So you're not going to be a Fortune 500 CEO and Mother of the Year in the same year. It's just not going to happen. So you have to figure out where your priorities are and what you're willing to outsource. And you have to outsource as much as you can. The good news is today it's a lot easier to outsource grocery shopping through Instacart or whatever it is. So I think, and don't get hung up on you're not being the best X or Y, because you won't be able to do everything. Nobody can. And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with Laura, and I agree with Farzia. I'm a parent of 2 girls. One is about to turn 6 and the older one is 8. And, I obviously work full time, and I try to be an involved mom. So what has worked for us, and that's not always possible, right? But again, in the vein of, to the extent that you can simplify your life, like do it. We go to a school that is very close to the house. The pediatrician is close to the house. maybe it's not the best pediatrician in town, but it's a really good one, and I don't have to drive an extra hour there. And I don't even know if there's another one who's better. But just like building your life in a way that's sustainable. And you can't always do that. We moved to Austin, Texas from San Francisco. I felt like San Francisco was a lot harder and had a lot of pressures. And there is a reason why people are moving away from certain areas and moving to others where perhaps it's possible to streamline your life. So definitely that. And in terms of self-care, it's probably like super basic and intuitive, but I wasn't doing it before. I now work out with a trainer several times a week, and it's a set time, and I have to turn up and I have to do it. Otherwise, I have to pay him otherwise, so might as well be there. And there would always be, at least in my case, some kind of excuse why I didn't, do something active that day. So I essentially outsourced to somebody else holding me accountable for taking care of my health, and that worked for me. So sharing that in case it's helpful to somebody else.
Yeah, and I echo all those thoughts. I think the idea of boundaries is extremely important. I remember very early in my career, I wanted to do everything and say yes to everything, and I just felt really junior, so I didn't feel like I could have boundaries at all because I wanted to be that person that was always willing to either stay really late or go really early or travel here, there, and anywhere. But there are aspects of that, I think, that backfired, right? Because that's how you get to burnout very quickly. Number one, and number two, there are instances where it can feel like you're working very hard, but you're not getting a whole heck of a lot for it. So I'm a fan of just clear boundaries. So that's number one. I would say number two, fortunately, I have family and friends who are very involved in my life and that we do life together. So they're very nice about pulling me aside and saying, hey, this is the fifth or sixth day you've been working around the clock. You may want to maybe take a moment or take a beat. Because I realized a while ago, like it's just not you, right? It's also the people that are around you that it impacts. And so having people around that maybe can point out some of these like blind spots, like, hey, it might be time for a vacation, or, it might be time to take, the afternoon off, or maybe time to take sick day. Like, I know you feel like you can power through it, but really, like, you need to take some time. So that's the second thing. I would say the third, is that at least for me, it's very easy to get caught up in the work bubble where your whole life, everything you do, everything you think about is what you're doing or contributing at work. And so for me, I try to make it important to have a life outside of work, right? And it sounds very sort of silly and trivial, but honestly, I think for at least for me, it's the truth. So, I'm pretty involved in church. Like I have organizations that I support. There's a neighborhood book club, and I try to attend. And it's not a book about like work or anything. Like it's usually something fun and nonfiction to just take my brain away from, solving problems for businesses and CEOs. And so I would say that's incredibly helpful. And I would say the fourth is I mean, not to sound gimmicky, but like treat yourself, like whatever it is. So I love, and my boyfriend knows this, every 2 to 3 weeks, like I get a mani and a pedi. It's not like I'm not willing to do it myself. It's not like I'm above doing it myself, but it's just one of those small things where it's 90 minutes. I don't really talk to anyone. I just kind of get pampered a little bit. Like I have a therapist and I go once a month. Again, like there's no earth-shattering thing per se, but again, I know it's a set time where I can process. I'm an internal processor and I get to work through things. And I mean, there's instruments maybe you can see in the back, like sometime is that, sometime it's hiking. So whatever those things are, that you can kind of set in the calendar that are almost like treat yourself kind of moments. I just highly encourage it because what I've come to realize, if I don't do it, then all of a sudden I'm just jumping from one work thing to another responsibility to another commitment. And in the process, I'm fraying and kind of just losing a sense of who I am. Right. And so whatever that is, I just highly recommend it. So we have some, let's see, Q&A questions. So just want to make sure that we address some of these. So the first, there was talk about working with an executive coach to hone in leadership skills. I know we've touched upon it, but wanted to maybe serve it up so we can answer it in a pointier way. I've had an executive coach. It's been fantastic. I've had him on and off for a while. Personally, why I like using him is because it's a great sounding board in terms of like, hey, this is the situation. This is how I reacted. This is, sort of what I think should happen and what do you think I should do? And it's very interesting. You can get in your head and you can say, well, either I'm right and that person's wrong, or I handled it the right way, or how could they respond like that? I don't really understand, or vice versa, right? So it's nice to have someone who can provide some objective feedback, but also to sort of say, okay, well, this is one instance. This happens to be an example. How do we learn from this example and build upon whatever leadership skills, soft skills, hard skills, so that you can grow as an individual? So I highly recommend it. And while I don't have one presently now at this point in time, I've definitely used the same person for the last handful of years, and he's been fantastic. So I recommend that.
Yeah, and I also recommend if you've never had an executive coach, as I said, I've had a couple. And the one who I really valued was the one who went around and interviewed key people in jobs I'd had, so I could get a sort of 360 view of myself and what they saw over time, which was incredibly valuable. So every executive coach is different; they may have a different style, but at least for me, that feedback was phenomenal.
Great.
Any other thoughts or plus ones? Cool. There's another question in the Q&A. Have you ever dealt with coworkers in the leadership team at your level who are threatened by you and will subtly try to undermine you? How have you handled that? So if yes, how have you handled that? And I'll throw that out to the panelists.
Touch on this a little bit. I mean, I do think there are instances where if someone in a leadership position is threatened by you, you are not going to check off. A good team isn't a team built on everyone having the same skill set. So a good manager is going to pull in the best in their team who do different things well as well, because that as a collective, then the team's impact is going to be stronger. And so a leader who is threatened by you, part of this is, I think, Lara, you talked about this. Is the work that you're doing making them look good? That's one way to approach it. But the other way is teach people how to fish versus just giving them the fish. So sometimes if you are, intellectual curiosity, I think, is one of those traits that us being from University of Chicago just runs deep. And so if we are investing in learning new things or honing a skill, be willing to share your thoughts or share how you do something, because I think part of this is there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And if you are confident in the skill that you do really well, and you're able to convey it to the leader that you may feel like is being threatened, there's a way to do it effectively versus coming off as arrogant, where they might just be thinking that you're in it for their role or what have you. But I do think there's an art to how you engage in those situations. Not sure if that's like a clear way, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah. I agree. And that's a very good question, because that is often the reality on the ground, right? People are competing for the top spots, and there are only so many of them, right? Because it's usually a pyramid and not the other way around, or it should be a pyramid, not always a pyramid. So yes, firstly, again, going back to Lara's point, super valuable. Like, your boss has an incentive to help you if you're making them look good. So it's a fine line between how good are you? Are you threatening your boss? And this is not a philosophical conversation about like are all leaders good and like interested in the good of the company? Like mostly people want to hold on to their jobs and move up even higher. So occasionally you're lucky where you have a boss who is going to keep moving up and, they take you with you and you're both moving up together. Occasionally that's not the case. Sometimes you are in companies where the work structure is kind of set and your boss is not going anywhere and you may not be going anywhere either. And then you're in this situation where, well, this is it. And am I willing to stay here long term, or am I going to move laterally to another team perhaps and have my boss's support to do that? In terms of conflicts or feeling like the peers might be undermining you at a big company, I actually was in a situation like that somewhat recently. And it's interesting, I don't have an executive coach, but I have a husband who has a lot of opinions on how companies should operate. And I joke that I'm his emotional intelligence coach and he's mine, like, sort of do it this way. And it's also, by the way, helpful because we're all both so busy. Like we try to stay connected. So I feel like if I share some of the situations that I'm dealing with at work, at least he knows what is going on, right? And same goes the other way. So I had a situation where, a colleague I thought was in the wrong and was behaving inappropriately. And I also knew that he has a history of kind of going to senior leaders and presenting his side of it and making other people look not so great. So because I knew that, and that goes back to building relationships and knowing things, right? And how people might behave in a certain scenario. What I did to prevent that was try to get to the decision maker first. And that way you anchor your view. Like, unfortunately, sometimes that's how it works. And that's kind of the I don't want to say it's a zero sum, but sometimes it is. Like somebody's opinion will get listened to and taken into account, and hopefully, and the other one might have to be dismissed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all those points. The only thing I would add is, I think sometimes in the kerfuffle, we almost forget the humanistic side. And it's just super fascinating in the work world, like broadly in the work world, where sometimes just people operate out of fear, they operate out of bias, they operate out of, I didn't get a chance to have my protein smoothie that day, so I'm, grumpy, and now is the fifth day. Like I'm always fascinated by, what can be those motivators. And then sometimes out of that I chuckle and say, gosh, at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of humans, right? Just sort of trying to survive. And I think when I was younger, a lot of it was like, well, I'm just going to show you the like almost kind of, run roughshod a little bit and said, let me show you that, like, I need to be here, I should be here, so on. And not to say that there isn't a place for that, but I also think there are times where you can get to a common denominator of, okay, well, I'm not a threat to you. Like I'm not after your job, I'm not after anything. Like I just want us to do well. And for the amount of times, especially, a lot of my work is with CEOs. A lot of times they're way older than me. A lot of times they've not necessarily encountered anyone that particularly looked like me or had a pedigree of me. And already before I've walked in the room, they've just assumed all sorts of stuff. Right. And so I remember there was this situation working with a company, had a peer, and it was very clear that they'd assume all these things. And then, at the end, we were all kind of powering down our computers and trying to get about their day. And so, this individual wouldn't even look me in the eye, wouldn't acknowledge I was I mean, it was just, insane. So I just said to this person, so, what do you have going on after this? And they kind of flippantly answered. And they were like, well, I don't even think this person even, asked me what I was doing. I was like, oh yeah, I just volunteered my answer. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I'm going hiking and I just got this dog and we're going to go. I knew that this individual was a hunter. And I know it doesn't look like this, but I do duck hunt and I'm very outdoorsy. And so, this individual looked at me like I've just seen this human in a whole different way, right? And not to say that that works all the time, but I think that as women, there are additional tools that we can use in our tool set. And sometimes it has to be, well, no, I need to sort of beam you down to earth and realize that this is not an adversarial thing. Sometimes you need to kind of ignore it because it'll throw you off your game. Sometimes you need to figure out how to bridge that gap. And to bridge that gap, you kind of need to get to this more humanistic space. So there's no one size fit all, but just offer that also as a tool for your tool belt to use when you encounter, a similar situation. So we have a couple more questions. So just looking at the thread, how do you manage up when your bosses or COO, CEO won't respond or haven't made decisions about conversations and items that need their decision pending for months? Okay, so this is like a really tactical point in time question. Any thoughts, ladies?
All I can say is like I deeply empathize with that because for a part of my career, I was chief of staff to an CHRO at a company, and he just would not make decisions. And by the way, not making a decision is also a decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that puts everybody else behind. And it was maddening because, I have a personality where I have a task and I have a checkbox next to it, and I just want to put a checkbox. And in his case, like he would make decisions that I guess were on topics that he had to make decisions on, right? It's sort of about the prioritization. I think, Farzia, you touched upon that people have a list and what's important on their list, and you have to understand that. It was just a really stressful job. And, I like it was herding cats and like getting other people to let him know that we needed a decision. And frankly, I thought it was a lot of wasted effort and energy. And if only people could make a decision. But then you start trying to understand, well, why are they acting that way? And in a lot of these cases, they don't want to be responsible for the decision that was made.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so company dependent. This was at Visa, which, it's a great company, great brand, great product, but it's a very relationship driven business, probably like McKesson in a way people have very long tenures there. And sometimes the incentive is to stay at status quo and not change things. That is not the culture that we have at Meta. We make decisions very quickly and then we change the decisions that we made. So it's very different. So sometimes, it's not a cultural fit. And I will say, like, my experience doing that, I probably learned something, but then the next time that I was offered a chief of staff job, I said no because I just did not want to be the cat herder and chief for another part of my life.
Mm-hmm. Good. Any other thoughts on that?
I also think you want to be defensive in the sense that not defensive, but you want to have a good defense in that kind of situation. So I would send an email. I would send a couple of emails. As we discussed previously, I would really need your input on the following so that you have in writing an electronic record of whatever was discussed and whatever decisions are pending so that nobody can hang you with the fact that that decision wasn't made by your boss. I think you have to be proactive about that kind of thing when you aren't getting what you need in your management chain.
I also think that there's probably something to be said about micro decisions. So if there's a big decision that is just not being made, are there micro decisions that can be made by others, stakeholders who are accountable for whatever the decision's outcome will entail that can be made in the interim to at least show somewhat incremental progress if the big decision is just not being made by the person at the top?
Yeah, and I will add too, just as someone who's been on both sides, which is super fascinating. Um, I just have a natural bias for action, just being in tech. I'm like go go go, like I want it done 10 days ago. And so when someone, especially a leader, is not moving at the same pace, I'm like, oh, this is just a simple, just say yes or say no, or why won't you just respond something, please just respond. I think the older that I've gotten, I've realized what sometimes seemingly is a, very straightforward. I've given you all the information. I've given you what I think should be my the recommendation on the answer. I've given you all the things you need to make a decision. There are sometimes external mitigating factors that from where I'm sitting, I just can't see. And so, just even this week, as a person on my team that wants a decision, on resources and want to move a bunch of things, but the individual doesn't know that we have to kind of tread lightly because I know that other teams are going to be impacted. Our team isn't going to be, but it looks strange if other teams are going to be impacted. And then all of a sudden I say, hey, so here's my recommendation for things that my team need. And I also can't communicate it to that team member, right? That there are all these other things that are happening and conversations that are happening that this person is not privy to. So it was really interesting, sort of, progressing in my career. And it's almost like when you go behind the Iron Curtain and you're like, wow, like this is, some of this can even feel like Game of Thrones. Like there are all these things, what I think are sometimes trivial decisions, just yes or no, just make the decision, are actually a lot more complex. But I just don't know from where I'm sitting, right? Or it was mentioned, folks have been in their roles for a while. So again, I might think it's a trivial, decision, but I know, or my boss may know that, well, someone's going to be upset and that person's been around for 20 years. And so, as a leader, part of my job is, to defend the realm, right? And so I want to do the best that I can. And sometimes that just means, if you're a leader, you might have to move slower than anticipated. And it feels like, why aren't we moving? So just maybe another perspective. So if you can, certainly, as was said, document, send, lean in, but also sometimes there's another aspect to maybe the decision that you cannot see. And so maybe that might stall some things. So we're coming at time, and so I want to make sure that I do a couple of things. One, thank you, panelists. Like all of you have been fantastic, and frankly, I've learned a boatload. So I think it's been great, and so I appreciate just the time and the effort and the thoughtfulness of it all. So thank you, and for all of you that have joined and taken an hour plus of your day to use this as an opportunity to learn from others. Appreciated the questions were fantastic. There are a lot of takeaways and key themes, certainly around there's no right or wrong to any of these, answering any of these questions. Having balance at times is a personal decision and you have to make trade-offs. Certainly invest in yourself, in your career, seek those mentors, advocates, sponsors as you can. If nothing else, hopefully that resonated with all of you that have joined. And I believe that this is being recorded, which is fantastic. I think some of you have asked for contact information. Certainly if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. That's usually the best way, and I think we all are. So that might be sort of the easiest way to connect really quickly, and we can take it from there. But if there's nothing else, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.